Hi, I'm Esty. Welcome back to this study on attention as prayer. Each week we are returning to the same truth. God's presence is constant, even when our attention is not. Through practices of prayerful attention, we are learning to notice God's presence that is always with us. In this fourth session, I want to introduce to you a practice of prayer that is very dear to my heart. It's called Lectio Divina. Lectio Divina is Latin for divine reading, and it's a way of praying with Scripture. Most of the time, when we read Scripture, we are reading it for information. We want to learn something, like in a Bible study. Or maybe we're looking for guidance on how to live a faithful life. And that kind of reading is good. That kind of reading matters. The challenge is that reading Scripture for information alone doesn't always lead to formation. If we always stay in our thinking minds, our hearts might never be changed. Eugene Peterson, the man who translated the Message Bible, says that if we're not careful, Bible study can be just like reading a cereal box. You know, you can read the side of the box and learn all the ingredients and the nutritional value. But for that cereal to do you any good, you have to pour it in a bowl and add some milk and eat it. Eugene Peterson says it's the same with the Bible. He writes that this is a book to be experienced, savored, dallied over. If we're always studying something, then we're going to miss it. I would add that when we approach the Scripture just as a place of information, what we miss is the presence of God. It's kind of like that guerrilla experiment I told you about in the first session. When we're only focused on extracting information out of the Bible, we can become intentionally blind to what God is trying to say to us through Scripture. And so Lectio Divina is a practice that invites us to listen rather than to analyze or study. It invites us to pay attention to how God is speaking into our lives through the words of Scripture. This practice, Lectio Divina, is very old. It was developed by Saint Benedict in the 6th century and practiced for many centuries in the monasteries. Long before the printing press made the Bible easy to read by everyone, Lectio Divina was a way of hearing Scripture read aloud and then prayerfully considering how you respond. For a very long time, this practice was largely unknown outside of the monasteries, but it's one of the great treasures of Christian spirituality that has been rediscovered in recent generations. Lectio Divina is best done with a short passage of Scripture, because you're going to be reading the same passage multiple times in this practice. I've included a list of some suggested passages in the study materials to help you get started. Lectio Divina unfolds in 4 movements. The first movement is Lectio, or reading. You've selected a passage, and so then you read it slowly, out loud, if possible. As you read, you're just noticing what catches your attention. Is there a word? Is there a phrase? Is there an image? Is there something that just kind of leaps off the page at you? In this first movement, you're not trying to force anything. At this stage, you're simply paying attention. What kind of grabs you? The second movement is called meditatio, or meditation. Read the passage again, and this time notice what stirs within you. What emotions come up for you? What associations come to mind? Is there something in your life that this passage of Scripture seems to be touching? This isn't about analysis. It's not about thinking what's going on in this passage. It's really noticing how the Scripture is meeting you, how it impacts you. The third movement of Lectio Divina is called oratio, or prayer. While the entire practice is prayer, in this third movement, you allow the passage to lead you into a conversation with God. So you read the passage a third time, and this time you're listening for what God is saying to you. What does it seem like God is saying? And what do you want to say to God in response? You allow the Scripture to prompt your prayer, and you tell God what you are hearing, what you are feeling. The fourth final movement is contemplatio, or contemplation. Read the passage of Scripture one last time, and then simply rest. There's nothing to do in this movement, nothing to figure out. You are invited to be still in God's presence. You're not seeking a feeling or looking for an answer. You're just sort of crawling into the lap of love and resting. This fourth movement, contemplation, is kind of like what's described in Psalm 131, where it says, a child at rest in its mother's arms. The fourth movement is a time to rest in God's arms and do nothing. And because we don't really like to do nothing, the fourth movement is the one that's the most tempting to skip over, because it seems to be the least useful of the movements of Lectio. By this point, we've read the Scripture 4 times. You've heard it 4 times, and you might feel like you should be getting something out of it, you know? Maybe you haven't had a big aha with the Scripture passage. Maybe you don't feel like God has really said anything to you. Maybe you're not really feeling it. So you want to skip the fourth phase of being still and just move on with your day. But this fourth movement, called contemplation, is where Lectio Divina offers us a very unique gift. Most all of the prayer practices that I'm introducing to you in this study fall into a category of what's called cataphatic prayer. Prayer that engages our minds, our emotions, our imagination. This is the kind of prayer that we already know and we probably already practice. But this contemplation movement, the fourth phase of Lectio Divina, is a different kind of prayer. It's what's called apophatic prayer. Apophatic prayer sets aside our usual ways of thinking, imagining, speaking. Rather than doing more, rather than thinking more, with apophatic prayer, we let go and we do nothing. Apophatic prayer quiets our spirit and allows us to be found in the presence of God. And this usually feels unfamiliar, often like nothing is happening. Apophatic prayer is sometimes described as formless. It's called the via negativa, or the way of letting go. It's very different, but apophatic prayer is not empty. As you learn to rest without striving, without thinking, something is happening. We are being opened to quieter, deeper ways of knowing God, ways that are often drowned out by our constant thought and effort. The Christian tradition calls these ways of knowing the spiritual senses. And they're not something that we manufacture. They emerge as we learn to let go and attend differently to God's presence. This is what the fourth movement of Lectio Divina is about. It's about yielding to mystery and resting in God. I really encourage you not to skip over this part and to just, for once, surrender your need to do anything. Read the passage of Scripture and let it be. Lectio Divina as a whole, all four movements together, are an invitation into a slower, more receptive way of being with God. When we read Scripture slowly and listen for what stirs us, when we speak honestly, when we rest, we are practicing attention as prayer. We're training ourselves to notice God, not just in the words of Scripture, but in how Scripture is working in us. Lectio Divina helps us to slow down and listen through the Scripture. And over time, this way of paying attention begins to shape us. It changes us. We become less hurried, less reactive, more available to the presence of God that meets us not only in Scripture, but in the ordinary moments of our lives. If you'd like to be guided through this practice, I invite you to join me for my guided Lectio Divina video, where together we'll walk through how to pray this prayer. As you go, remember our refrain for this study. God is already here. We are invited to notice. May this way of reading and resting open your attention to the God who is already speaking. Thank you so much for joining me for this session. If you're watching this video with a small group, I invite you to download the small group discussion guide on my website, realizegrace.com. Have conversation now when the video ends about what you're thinking, what God might be saying to you, how you are noticing God's presence with you. Thanks for watching. I look forward to continuing on the journey with you in the next session.